Steve Porcaro. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Where are you coming to us from right now?
Valley Village, California.
Is that far from LA?
No, not really. Just about 20 minutes, half hour. It's like the southern tip of North Hollywood.
Do you find yourself like staying around your house a lot now, or are you still going out and traveling? At least going into the city every once in a while.
No, I stay around my house a lot. Even when I'm home, even when it's not COVID and all that stuff's going on, I'm home a lot when I'm home.
So you're the kind of a homebody type of person?
Very much so, mainly because this is where my studio is. So I spend a lot of time in my studio. So it's a good thing that it's home, or else my friends and family wouldn't see me very much.
What do you spend in your studio the majority of the time working on? Stuff for yourself or stuff for other people?
Stuff for myself, especially these days. It depends. It's kind of, I go through different waves. Often when friends will ask me to help out with something, we all kind of barter and help each other out. So I'll get on another project, someone else's stuff for a period of time. But mostly, especially these days, I'm really focusing on my own stuff and digging up old stuff that I never finished and finding the backup media for the stuff. And it's sometimes is a hunting expedition.
So
but,
when you're going
time
back,
has moved on so fast, and a lot of things I had backed up, the computers have changed, and I find myself putting together older systems right now so I can find the background vocals to some tune I'm trying to finish.
So when you go back, are you taking the actual raw tracks and you're not remaking anything? You're taking stuff that you've made in the past and then just making them in a new situation?
A lot of stuff I probably should just remake, but a lot of things I'll hear, there was, that magic in the demo. There'll be something about the demo that I'm married to, and I sure would like to start off with that at least. So
yeah, I mean, the song, the song Uptown Funk, the Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars track?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was the vocal track for that. Is actually the demo. It was recorded on an SM58. And you can actually listen, if you listen to that track, his actual raw vocal, the Bruno's vocal, is way lower fidelity than the background vocals because it was him in the studio with the monitors, to the best of my knowledge, recording that song, and that the demo just had such like an energy that they couldn't recreate that they ended up using it.
I believe that. I'm aware of that track. I'm very aware of that track, and yeah, there's a magic and an energy and a feeling there. It wouldn't surprise me a bit for them to keep what they had there.
Yeah. Well, Steve, let me go back for a second because I want to get some information on your past. So, where are you from originally?
I was born in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay. And so you've said in the past that the Beatles on Ed Sullivan was like your initial inspiration to get into music. And a lot of people say that. I recently had I think about a month ago, Dom Famulero, who's an old instructor of mine and who's interviewed you in the past. Fantastic guy. His experience was the exact same thing. It was Beatles on Ed Sullivan. But do you think that coming from a musical household where you're being exposed to music at such a consistent basis may have, even at such a young age, enhanced how you kind of reacted to them because you were able to sort of objectively see how unique they were?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, music was there anyway. Music was where we were all going anyway. But it just really felt like for me and my brothers and millions of other people, it's really amazing. Well, or not amazing, how many people of my generation say that same thing about the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. It just hit us all like such a ton of bricks, and it was like our music. These guys didn't look like anybody our parents listened to. They didn't sound like anybody else that was on the radio then. And it just really felt like we were discovering them, you know what I mean? And I think their later career and how long lasting they were and how much depth they wound up having had something to do too with us, the way we look back at that. It wasn't just, for some people it might, something like that could be just, I don't know, something that reminds them of their youth or what was going on right at that time, the zeitgeist of that time. But for us, it's way beyond that. You know what I mean? Because of how much depth they wound up having and how much they wound up sticking around, and just the long-term effect it had on all of us.
And were you ever able to go and meet the group? Because Paul worked on Thriller for the Girl Is Mine. Did you play synths on that track?
I did. I didn't cut the track with the guys, but I did do synths on that. Paul was there. I've met Paul a couple times. I met George a couple times. I met Ringo a couple times over the years. You know, thanks to Luke. Lukather was had played in his band and graciously invited me to a couple shows to meet Ringo. You know, it's always a thrill. We met Paul. We were on the road. We were in Grand Rapids, and Paul was doing a show there, and we all know the drummer. And he introduced us to Paul before the show. It was great.
Did you ever say to any of the guys how much they meant to you and how they inspired you?
No, not really. I think they know. I think they knew. I think they all knew. Yeah, no, it was, and they knew who, you know, especially my older brothers. They had worked with my brother Jeff, had worked with Paul a few times, and when we were in there with Michael, it just was, it was crazy. It was a crazy session, the Girl Is Mine sessions, and it was really cool. After it was all over, everybody had left. All the big entourages had left. The media that was there, Dick Clark and his whole filming crew, everyone had left, and it was just like me, my brother Jeff, and Luke were in the studio, and Jeff was taking his cymbals down, and Paul somehow had gotten away from everybody and snuck back into the studio, and it was great. We had like a nice 10 minutes with just the four of us hanging out and talking. You know what I mean?
And was that whole track planned out before the session, or were you still working on it while you were in the studio?
Oh, no, that was very planned out, you know, with Quincy and Michael. And yeah, it was very planned out and arranged.
Mm-hmm. And so after the Beatles, really, you see them on TV and they give you that initial inspiration. What do you do next? What's that move that gets you to start playing an instrument? Did your father get you into playing drums at any point?
No, I mean, well, we were always playing drums. There was always a drum set laying around. All three of us boys had, you know, I remember just playing the carpet sometimes. You know, there was always drumsticks laying around. But I know Mike and Jeff, because of the Beatles, they started taking guitar immediately. Mm-hmm. And Jeff didn't last very long. He went back to the drums, but I think the guitar helped lead Mike to playing bass, you know.
Mm-hmm. And was your father at all, was he saying, like, you had the instruments around, but was he pushing it and saying, "Hey guys, you should all become musicians like me"? Was it like that kind of situation?
He really wasn't pushing it. I think he knew even then what a tough career it could be, mm-hmm. how hard it could be to make a living, and it was always available to us. It was always there. They were lessons were encouraged and paid for, and there was always all of that. But there wasn't this big push. There wasn't this big push to, you know. It wasn't some horror story of being forced to practice. I looking back, I actually wish it was more. I wish they were a lot stricter about us practicing, you know?
Were you not the type of person who would go? Because I'm like that. I need that push to practice, because I play drums, and I especially when I was younger. Now not so much, but I need that push. Were you the kind of person that needed that edge to get you to really work on technical stuff?
It had to be fun for me, or my attention span was just, I'm sure I was dealing with some attention deficit. As far as when it would get down to playing piano was fine. And once I learned a piece, I wouldn't stop playing it for everybody 100 times a day. But getting there, you know, what it took to get there. And when you're first sight reading a piece of music, you know, you're first doing your lesson and you're crawling through it, it was torture for me. You know what mm-hmm. I mean? Until in the 5th grade, there was a classmate of mine who was an amazing pianist, and he would play some classical pieces that, you know, were real hooky to me, almost, you know what I mean? They were really, I would watch him play and go, I want to do that, you know, I want to be able to do that. And then it was a little bit easier. Then I felt, when I first would sight read those pieces, I would feel driven, you know? Mm-hmm. I'd feel, you know, I felt that drive to want to learn it, even though it was hard. But overall, trying to play, you know, challenging piano music was always very difficult at first.
So was it the technical aspect of things that really was slowing you down at that point?
Yeah, just my stick-to-itiveness, my focus, my concentration it was tough for me to stay there, to stay there long enough to get over the hump of, that first thing of, you know what I mean, when you're connecting, when everything's connecting with your brain and your hands, and you're able to read ahead and really make it sound like something. That was so hard for me at first. It was difficult to stay focused.
Was there any part of it that came really naturally?
Some of it when it got to contemporary music and, rock and roll and some of that, yeah, some of that came kind of easily. And I always liked fooling around with, I saw a kid at some kind of convention I was at when I was a little kid. There was a young teenager, and he was playing this, I don't know what kind of organ, kind of a theater organ of some kind. And that had tons of presets and bells and whistles and buttons and, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And I was that totally caught my attention,
And how old were you at that
looked
point?
like fun,
How old were you then?
Shoot, I was probably just about 6 years old or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
5 or 6.
Okay. And so you start playing the keys, and at what point do you start thinking like, oh, this might be the thing that I want to do?
It happened pretty, soon after as far as knowing it was what I wanted to do, it was probably like, around 9 years old or so when we first moved out. And it was soon after, Sergeant Pepper had come out, and just pop music in general. I really felt I knew I really wanted to do that. A few years later, the Doors came out and Light My Fire. And, again, I was really drawn to organs and all that extra stuff,
Mm-hmm. And so you said you're around 9 and you guys moved to LA. Is that where you go to from Connecticut? And how established of a professional musician was your father at that time that you're starting to get more serious on the keys and you moved to LA?
Yeah, well, he right away, he was, always a jazz drummer. Always, he always did music to make a living. But his main focus, even though he played percussion in orchestras in California, in Hartford, he was mostly a jazz drummer. But when he came out here, and he kind of knew that he was going to have to take his reading very seriously and his mallet playing very seriously. Usually in an orchestra, if you have a very difficult xylophone part or marimba part or whatever, you've got a day or two to take it home and bone up. But in the studios here in LA, you maybe have 1 or 2 run-throughs, and then you better be playing it perfectly. And he knew his sight reading had to be at another level than it was at the time. But he was always completely committed to, that's all he ever wanted to do for a living,
And how are you at that point in terms of your musicianship? Are you playing in a lot of groups? So this is what, middle school?
Yeah,
going
we
into
just
high
kind of
school?
started putting together neighborhood groups. My brother Jeff right away, and then soon after myself and Mike, and always taking lessons, and where I would start sloughing off when it would get too difficult, when I would be too much time between lessons, and where it would be easy, a typical time to give up. I didn't give up. I maybe stopped with that teacher, but I would pick up with another teacher.
Were you going through a ton of teachers?
I was, as a matter of fact. It's kind of embarrassing how many great teachers I had. And because, again, my dad knew all these people, and they actually started bartering. My dad was very good at teaching drums. And a lot of his friends, their kids would want to play drums, and he'd barter with them. They'd ask him if he would teach their kids drums, and he'd say, if they were a keyboard player, he'd say, sure, you teach my kid, piano and stuff. So I had a lot of fantastic teachers. That started in Connecticut. I started taking like at 4 years old, but I was never a great student, ever.
Did any of the teachers ever get upset with you because you'd come in and not have your stuff prepared or something like that? Any strict teachers?
Very. Some of them were very strict. Yeah, some were very strict. Those were some of the best ones. But, with piano, it'd be hard. They would, you would struggle to learn a piece. It would take several weeks or whatever for me to say, learn a piece. And then you'd have these teachers that would say, okay, great, play that in all 12 keys next week. See you later, and it'd be like, for me, this insurmountable Mount Everest amount of work to do, because piano, everything is in such most keys, different keys feel so different, are like, learning new fingering. And so it took me a while.
Was there a point where you just said, screw it, I'm not taking lessons anymore, I'm just going to basically be self-taught?
Not really. I mean, I started working before that happened, I've kind of, my dad always had this thing. He was kind of forever a student. There was always something, especially in the world of percussion. There was, when Indian music in the 60s became very big, I mean, he started studying tabla and stuff very seriously. There was always something. There was always some instrument where the real masters of it, had it on a whole nother level. And yeah, there were certain things you could kind of skate around on and fool around on and get by sometimes. But if you wanted to be the guy that really had it mastered, it took a lot of work and a lot of hours, and it was all over the place. There's always something to learn, and the same with piano, especially if you wanted to get into orchestration, get into arranging, learning the different instruments, all that theory. There was always something to learn.
Mm-hmm. And talking about your dad's connection, so he's the reason that you guys connect with David Paich, because his father and your father work together. So
Yeah.
when is it that your brothers and David get together and then come to you and say, hey, we're starting this band, do you want to be a part of it? Or did you guys talk to it as a group?
Yeah, not at all. No, they were, they were 3 years older than I was. Now, when you're 14 and, when you're 12 and 13 and 14, that's like a million miles away. You know what I mean? I was of a different generation. You know what I'm saying? I was a little kid to them. They were, at that time, they were using guys and musicians their age. That didn't come until way later. Yeah, they got together and they, David Paich joined the high school band that Jeff had going with other friends in high school, doing top 40 stuff and playing a lot of dances and proms. And they, right out of high school, they went on to doing professional gigs. They went on the road with Sonny and Cher and started working with Seals and Crofts and started doing sessions as I was just entering high school.
Okay.
And I put together pretty much the same kind of band that they had, but just with guys that were in my grade, like Steve Lukather and Mike Landau and John Pierce and Carlos Vega. And that was my band. And they would come and see some of our gigs, and I saw that we kind of had it going on. They'd show up, my brother Jeff and Paich would show up at some of our dances and stuff. And, were proud of us and saw that we were keeping the flame burning there. But it wasn't until right when I left high school and I joined Gary Wright's band and I was dealing with all these synthesizers live that I think they saw me doing that and saw that I could, I could come in handy as far as help with synthesizers go.
And you go out with Gary.
Sorry?
No, I was going to say you go out with Gary Wright in around 77. So that's about a year before 75. Toto comes out. 75. Okay.
75. Yeah, the year I graduated. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so you're touring with Gary Wright, and it's about 3 years before the first Toto record comes out. Mm-hmm. What is it that happens in those 3 years that connects you and you guys start the actual band to get the first record out?
So the key thing between that is the whole Boz Scaggs thing, is the whole Silk Degrees album. So while I'm with Gary Wright and playing live with Gary, and they were seeing me because Gary was doing some big concerts. We were doing some great stadium shows with the management and the agents we had opening for other bands. And they saw what I was doing with that and that I could handle synths. And then Boz's band, they did Silk. This is while they were doing Silk Degrees, which was David Hungate, my brother Jeff, and David Paich. And right away, they wanted to help Boz put together a band for the road. So they saw me, and they had seen from our high school gigs, Steve Lukather, and we kind of put together. That's when we all kind of joined. The generations joined was for Boz's band, and
Okay.
that led to Toto.
And you said before that Jeff, and I think you said about Mike too, that they were more natural musicians and they were the type of people that can just sit down and play. And you're the type of person that needs to tweak and refine things. Was that ever kind of a point of contention between you guys when you were in the band?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was never that kind of musician. I had never practiced piano hard enough or had enough legit chops or could really improvise the way they could. Luke went right up there. Luke was right on their level straight away. He was just a great natural musician. Yeah, I was always kind of like in movies, you got to have you have character actors in movies. I've always felt of myself as kind of like that in the music business.
And did they ever accept kind of your way of working and vice versa? Did you ever try to conform
In
to
a
their
way,
kind of sit
sure.
down type playing?
Sure, at times begrudgingly they started doing that. I mean, it wouldn't have been great to have two David Pages in the band. You know what I mean? There would have been very easy for them to find a lot of keyboard players that, as far as legit keyboard playing, guys who were better than me. But I was very happy being a programmer and helping Dave out and us being a team, and while at the same time learning from him. I mean, I was growing as a musician. It wasn't like I didn't want to know that stuff. I just, it didn't come as easily and natural to me as it did to them.
How is it that you started learning how to program synths? Is that just something you just start playing around with them? Is that how you figure all that stuff out?
Yeah, in high school, and I had a friend who had a Mini Moog and an ARP 2600, and he started showing me. And I was lucky to have guys like friends like Roger Lynn and this guy Ralph Dyke and Michael Boddicker. Was guys like him. I'd be calling him from the road with Gary Wright saying, how do I get a good string sound on a Oberheim, 4-voice? This is while I was on the road. Michael was, guys like Michael Boddicker were very helpful. And Roger Lynn, when I got my modular stuff, I had no idea what I was doing. And I just wanted a lot of synth voices because I was doing things with sequencers and I wanted to do things with more than one voice. And that sounds like anything any synthesizer does, but back then, Mini Moogs just played one note. And if you wanted to have more than one note, you had to have more than one Mini Moog, And I did that by just having these huge modular systems that David Page helped me acquire. And but I didn't know, I just kind of knew the basics. And guys like Roger Lynn started teaching me about voltage control and some synth basics, and all of a sudden I just kind of lit up. You start putting one and one together and two and two together. And all of a sudden you see all those jacks on the back of keyboards and stuff that no one ever uses. And all of a sudden, how to use those things, it was an amazing time period.
And so by 78, when the first Toto record comes out, do you consider yourself more of a keyboard player? Or are you considering yourself more of a programmer for synths?
Well, both, both. I considered myself a keyboard player too, that knew synths, My whole thing was to try to connect them. Most guys, I mean, it's very different now. And of course, there were many, many exceptions. Guys like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock always were very good with synths, and were also amazing, amazing players, of course. But the general rule was, the guys who really, really, really knew about synths were, the nerds with pocket protectors and stuff like that. The guys that really knew how to work the big modular stuff. And the most artsy guys, they didn't want to know about synthesizers. They didn't want to play anything other than a piano or maybe a Hammond organ if you were one of the, Jimmys and stuff. But, I mean, now it's very common for everyone to do both. But I kind of saw at the time, especially in the studios, this chasm where the real good players, the David Fosters, the David Pages, A lot of those guys as that were really into the studio scene, they weren't as deep into synths as I was willing to go.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of it was a pain in the ass having to have uh, uh, interfaces and black boxes so that a mini mo could play an ARP and all that stuff. People didn't have all that stuff. I got into that stuff. I made friends with those nerds, you know what I mean, who
Yeah.
knew all that stuff and tried to connect those two things together. And I didn't stop wanting to play keyboards. I didn't stop. As a matter of fact, it was what I wanted to do with that stuff as a keyboard player that drove me also.
Did you think of yourself as being a pioneer at that time? Or you thinking like, man, I'm pushing the envelope right now?
No, I don't think of myself as a pioneer, but I was right there. You
Hmm.
know, but I was right there when all this stuff was going on, when all these people, a whole lot of other people started putting two and two together, like I was. Yeah, I kind of was there, and it was an amazing time to be around guys like Roger Lynn who were just figuring out how to trigger a piece of digital audio with a button, and you know, that they could make a programmable drum machine. You know, I was right there and stuff, and showing them a lot of times, showing the synthy nerd guys, you know, really what it is, what a musician like a Jeff Porcaro would want to do. They had no patience. A lot of guys that were great players had no patience. They weren't going to spend hours programming and messing with that stuff, you
Was
know.
the majority of your income at that time outside of Toto coming from working as a synth or as a player?
Session guys doing sessions.
Doing sessions, okay.
Yeah.
Who were the notable people around that era? Like between the first and second Toto record, are you going in a bunch of session work? And between that, was that
Yeah,
78,
it was
79?
actually right before Toto too. You know, guys like David Foster started hiring me. He just, whenever he had anything to do with synthesizers, I was there, you know, for
Hmm.
a long period of, you know, for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe a little bit more than that. But whenever he did keyboards, whenever he did synths, I was there. So guys like him were responsible for me meeting Quincy Jones and working on the first Michael Jackson solo album, uh, um, which, you know, a lot of times they'd hire me back with, they'd hire me back when Foster did, or sometimes they started hiring me back on my own, you know, to do stuff. And all of a sudden that same producer would hire me to play on other sessions they were doing. And it kind of spread out. It was great. And again, guys like Michael Boddicker were wonderful in helping me get gigs and get sessions when I was first coming up.
Did you think Toto at that time was being like, oh, this is what my main thing is going to be, and I'm going to work on sessions on the side? Were you thinking like that way, or were you just kind of throwing everything at the
Yeah.
wall and just seeing what happens?
Well, pretty much. We didn't know by this time. My brother Jeff and David Page and David Hungate, they had such incredible careers going in the studio. Luke and I were just starting off, but they had these amazing, already established careers, playing on the coolest stuff. I was worried they would never put a band together because they were, you know, they sure didn't need to take that chance of stopping what they were doing and taking the time it took and the energy it took to put a band together. But thank God they did. That was always, you know, in their hearts too, I guess, to actually have their own band. And yeah, Toto was our priority. But we were all very lucky where, you know, when we would leave town, you know, we could leave town and do a tour. When we come back, we still had lots of work, you know, in the sessions, doing sessions.
Was there any specific concept that you guys had when you started the group? Were you thinking like, we want to sound like this, or we want to do this with the type of music we're doing?
You know, just to be our own, you know what I mean? We just kind of had our own idea. We were very influenced. I brought on a big prog influence, you know, but, you know, my brother Jeff and David Hungate and Paige, they had such amazing time and such amazing groove. And we played a lot of R&B growing up. And they also were heavily influenced by Hendrix and rock and roll. And it was just its own, doing our own thing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
We definitely we're doing our own thing, and David Page was a very, very strong writer to begin with. You know, we were just kind of finding our legs writing wise, the rest of us, and we're just starting to write tunes. But David, you know, had already written Silk Degrees with Boz. He'd already you know, had done a whole lot by the time Toto started, and was kind of hitting the ground running there.
Yeah, do you think you guys? I was actually literally about to say that. Do you think the sound of the band was straight off right from the get go? How it kind of ended up being? Because I talked recently with Hank Shockley, who produced with the Bomb Squad for Public Enemy, and he said that between the first and second album was a huge difference in terms of how they approached it. Do you think you guys had a period where it was like, okay, now we're really hitting our stride for what the style of the band is going to be, or were you right off the bat just right in it?
No, I think, and maybe other people could see the similarity and see the progression, but yeah, I thought we were kind of finding our way, We were kind of finding our way. The first album, we did some things real old school. David's dad still did the string and horn arrangements like you would on a singer's album, like you would on a typical pop album of that time, but we kind of made it more and more our own. To me, where we really found it was on Toto 4, was kind of when everything really came together and the tension was just right. And the tension was just right. The influences, there was, the alchemy of the influences was just right. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I gotta ask you a question about Toto 4, because that album, that is, I think, the second vinyl record I ever bought. Back in high school, I got really big into vinyl, and that was like one of the records that I would go to all my stores around my area. And I'm in central New York, so selection for music is not the best. But I found this copy of Toto 4, and my friend and I listened to that thing like probably, I mean, we every time we'd come out, it was that and Snarky Puppy. We'd listen to those two albums just on loop. And so the thing, it's just kind of a random question, and I've just heard this in passing through people. Is it true that the track Rosanna is based on Rosanna Arquette?
Yeah, I think so. We all kind of, Rosanna came into my life right around then, and David was writing a song, and I think he was struck by her the same way I was. You know what I mean? So there wasn't any weirdness there or anything like that. She just
you're dating her at the time the song is written?
Sorry?
And you're going out with her at the time that the song is written?
Yeah, I was going out with her. She was kind of coming over to David's house, and I think right when David was writing the tune, you know what I mean? And might have been was probably an influence. I wouldn't have been a bit surprised if Dave had a little crush on her. We all did, you know what I mean?
Did you feel like the king in the castle being like, hey, she's my girlfriend, everyone likes her?
Not at all. Not at all. You know what I mean?
Does David come to you and say, hey, I'm writing this song. Can I make it about your girlfriend? Is that okay?
Not at all. Not at all. It fit. It worked. It was perfect. She
Absolutely.
Was very, she was a very inspiring girl. You know what I mean? It never felt weird. It just was kind of, I really think he was just kind of starting the song. I remember him playing that groove and one time and her walking in the door to see me or whatever. It just was, that's the way stuff happens.
So did David come up with that drum groove, or did Jeff?
That's Jeff for sure.
Okay. I wasn't sure if
David, I knew, kind of wanted a New Orleans kind of thing. He wanted he wanted that kind of, again, New Orleans kind of thing, but that was pure Jeff as far as what he put together there.
I mean, that shuffle and the Purdy shuffle are kind of held in like the upper echelon of drum grooves.
That was Jeff. That speaks to having the right influences,
Yeah. And so what point is it now that, because Miles Davis plays with you guy, and I was talking to a teacher of mine, Amir, and he says that Miles Davis was really interested in Toto, and you guys, he was on the Fahrenheit record, right? Mm-hmm. And so how does that happen? Does he come to you and say, hey, I want to make music, or did you guys reach out to him?
Yeah, no, he had done, on one of his previous albums, he had done Human Nature, a song I co-wrote, you know what I mean, for Thriller. And
absolutely. The other people, see, on the actual stream, people are seeing this from a camera on the side, but as you can see, there is a 6-foot-tall poster of that album on my wall that has been there for about 2 years. So that song and that album mean a ton to me. But continue.
So the way that happened was he had done Human Nature, and it went real well. He liked it. His wife liked it, and when he started working with Tommy LaPuma, who was a friend of all of ours. We'd all worked with Tommy on different sessions, especially the other guys that work with Tommy a lot. And I think he wanted to hook Miles up with the guy who wrote Human Nature again. And we met. We met over at David's house. Miles and I got together at David's house, just the two of us, and discussed a couple things. I had a couple songs lying around that I thought were right around that same kind of style. We tried recording them, and it really didn't turn out. There was two songs, and they really didn't come out. Just the melodies, the way Tommy told me to just write them out, and Miles would play them, and they never really gelled. But we were having so much fun in the studio together. And being that Miles was hanging around there, David and Luke had come up with this piece and asked him, and he had also he hit it off with my brother Jeff. They were trading artwork with each other, and it just was a great hang. And they had asked him, we were working on our album, on the Fahrenheit album, and we asked him if he'd be willing to play on it. And he accepted. It was great. It was amazing. We were thrilled. My dad got to meet his hero, Miles Davis, and he was a sweetheart, you know.
Your father played on, I think, something like 6 Toto records. He was doing percussion on the records, right?
Yeah, I was wanting to include him.
What was the kind of vibe of having your father working on an album with you? Is he still acting like, these are my kids, so I'm the leader? Or was he able to take direction from you guys well?
Of course, no. He was thrilled to be there and thrilled to be part of it, and just so proud of all of us. You know what I mean? That we were doing it. We were living the dream. We had a record deal, and we were going on the road, and we were making a living as musicians. He was very proud of us, and he was always eager to please,
And so then after the Fahrenheit record comes out, so you do this track with Miles Davis. That's when you decide that you're going to move on and do some other stuff. Was there an exact catalyst that kind of pushed you to make that decision?
Not really. I just kind of, there was a lot of things, but especially at that time, it was very difficult. We'd really been trying real hard. Toto had gone through a lot with different lead singers and all of that kind of stuff. It was difficult keeping it going, keeping the momentum going after Toto 4. We kind of needed a break. All that it took to get to doing Toto 4 we just were all that touring and recording and all of it. We kind of needed a break, and it was a horrible time to take a break, right when the iron was real hot, you know what I mean, is really when you should strike again. And
were you thinking that at the time? You were like, was that like part of your decision, or sort of something pushing against you because you're thinking, man, really, should we do this right now? Were you thinking about that in the time?
Yeah, we all were. There was a lot of discussion amongst the band about that. But I had no intention then of leaving the band. But by the time Fahrenheit was done, the record company was like, all of a sudden grunge had really gotten into the picture. Record companies, that's all of a sudden we look up, and that, even though we'd won all these Grammys and Record of the Year and all that, soon after that, that whole style of pop music started to become pretty unpopular, Keyboards were all of a sudden very unpopular, you know what I mean? Especially to have 2 keyboard players in the band. You know what I mean? It was a lot more kind of Pearl Jam, Nirvana. It seemed to be heading quite a bit in that way. And there were discussions amongst the band about having a lot less of that proggy kind of orchestral stuff. That was what I was all about, That was my reason for being in the band, was that stuff. So I thought it was a good time. You know what I mean? I was very encouraged by what Human Nature had done with Michael, and just thought, boy, I would love to just write 3 of these a year and go off into the sunset or whatever. But it didn't all work out perfectly that way. I also found out that, without a deadline, I'm useless,
Really?
Yeah, but that was when I needed to take a break. I continued touring with the band for 2 more years. I didn't want to I didn't want to leave anybody hanging. There was no, even though, believe me, the tension in the band, especially between my brother Jeff, could get very intense. At the time I left, there was none of that. It was all done with a lot of love and very calmly. And it was no fuck you fest. It was just I decided I wanted to stay home, and I was so into my studio stuff. I was so into writing and using the studio as a tool, you know what I mean, to come up with sounds and all that. That was really as much fun as I had playing live, and I loved doing that, and I loved playing for big crowds and playing our songs. That was it was a real privilege and honor to be able to do that. I felt so lucky. By then, I'd had my full of it. You know what I mean? It was very intense touring. It was very hard to be away from my daughter and my family, and I just needed a break.
And you said you were like hoping that you could kind of pop out a couple Human Natures a year and keep working on that. Did you have? I got to ask you about that, because the whole Human Nature story is amazing to me. So initially, because David Paich is writing for Thriller, am I right on that?
Yeah, Quincy had been asking him for stuff, and they wanted a song like I remember very well the direction he was getting from Quincy was they wanted something like the Knacks' My Sharona.
And you're living with David at this point, right?
I'm living with David at the time, and I'm doing synthesizers on Thriller. I'm being hired by Quincy to do synths.
How'd you get that job specifically? Was that just because of Toto, or did David get the job, or vice versa?
No, because like I told you, Foster got me the gig doing Michael's first album, and Quincy just started hiring me after that.
So that's it was. I can't even. What was the name of his? Are you talking about the like
Off
his?
the Wall.
Oh, it's Off the Wall. Okay, so it wasn't the big ballady records. It was right before Thriller.
It was Off the Wall. It was the Quincy records.
Okay, gotcha. And so you're living with David, and so your daughter has an issue. You come up with the title Human Nature. Is that story the sole catalyst for the idea for the song? Was it just the title and you had like an idea, like a chord structure you're working with beforehand, or did that conversation completely inspire it?
Yeah, no, I've told this live. We did a thing, storytellers kind of thing live with Toto the last couple tours I did, where we were actually mixing Toto 4. We had one more mix to do, which was the song Africa. And I stopped by to see Heather on my way to the studio, and she'd had a rough day at school. And yeah, the title entered into my head, Human Nature, trying to explain why this boy who probably liked her had hit her at school that day. And the guys were in the booth putting up the mix, and I went out into the studio where the piano was, and pretty much the main chord structure of the song kind of all came to me at once.
How does that demo get out? Because it's on the internet. Your original demo is out. Do you know how that leaks?
I have no idea. Well, I mean, I do have an idea now. Yeah, it's funny because right then it's so funny, right around then, right before it came out, I was very good at organizing my cassettes. I had all my cassettes all numbered and logged in notebooks, but I couldn't find my Human Nature demo for some reason for the longest time. And I knew it was in these piles of cassettes somewhere. And all of a sudden it came out. I think actually on the internet, you can find all the demos to every song on Thriller. So I think maybe a second engineer, somebody who worked at the studio, somebody who worked for Quincy at the time, somebody compiled all these demos, of which Human Nature was one of them.
Yeah, that's totally true. Because I've heard all the original PYT and when Thriller.
They're all on there. So you know what I'm saying? They were all turned in. Someone must have compiled them, and I'm glad they did, because now I can just point people to what Quincy originally heard and what Michael originally heard.
At the point that you're writing that tape, you're solely a synthesizer programmer for the album, right?
With Quincy, yes. He kind of didn't see me as He didn't, you kind of felt, look, you were thrilled to be part of the team in any way, but you're also kind of, for me anyway, I kind of felt pigeonholed. If you're the synth programmer, you know what I mean? You're not the writer or the arranger or even the player sometimes, you know what I mean? It's, you're just doing your job. David Paich was the very famous songwriter,
Mm-hmm. And so you accidentally, the way it gets to Quincy's hands is you're just working synths, and you burn a copy of David's songs, and it just happens to have your track on the other side?
No, I had burned a copy of my song, and after that, David called down to me and says, "Look, we need to make a cassette of a couple things he had been working on the night before." I did that kind of stuff for David. That's how I paid my rent. I kind of ran the studio and would do things like that for him, to help him. He says, "We need to get that stuff to Quincy," and it was a very short cassette, and we normally never ran out of cassette tapes, believe me, but we happen to have run out of cassette. I mean, this is the way I remember it. And I just fast forwarded mine and my song, put it at the end and flipped the tape over. So it was blank. Like that was the A side of the cassette.
Okay.
Put a new label on it and put David's two things. And
did you have a copy? You had a separate copy for yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, I had the original. It was like a 4-track cassette. I had
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. And who contacts you and says, "Hey, so they accidentally hear the track," and are you thinking like, is there any part of your brain that's thinking like, yeah, they won't hear it, but maybe they will, and maybe they'll like it?
You know what I mean? Everybody, I've seen stuff online going, "Yeah, bullshit, he didn't think." I really, you know what I mean? I really was not thinking like that. I wasn't that much of a hustler. I wish I was, but I really was not thinking like that. And then it was the next day. I mean, I didn't know how he heard it on the other side, and like the Thriller 25 album or something like that, he describes that he had listened to the tape and he had let it go. And then all of a sudden he hears Human Nature. And so the only conclusion I could come to was that all cassettes then had auto reverse, that it must have run to the end, because it wasn't a really long cassette tape. It wasn't like it was a hour-long cassette tape or a 90-minute cassette tape. We had these short ones that we had that could just fit a couple songs on it. So the only thing I can imagine, and this is my assumption, was that the tape ran out. Quincy said he left it running, and that auto reverse kicked in, and he heard Human Nature, So what had happened was the next day, David calls me into the house. He says, "I just got off the phone with Quincy." And he goes, he was raving on for like 20 minutes about this song, Why, that we had sent over. And I didn't know David didn't know what he was talking about. He goes, "It took me a half an hour to realize that it was your song that he was talking about."
And does David ever get upset at you that basically in one shot you got a track on the record without even really even trying?
Every day. No, not at all. David was sure, of course there's going to be some professional jealousy or whatever in there if everyone's being honest, but he was more proud of me. David really believed in me. He saw how I got in my own way a lot of times as far as how I ran my business and my personal life, and I not everybody saw not everybody saw what I could really do, to be honest with you. I think he saw that, and he was overall, I think he was more proud of me and happy for me, and has still always supported me. And there was a lot more of that than any of the other stuff.
And did you hesitate at all to sign over the rights? Like, did you have any plans on using the song for yourself or for Toto?
No, I mean, this was, at one point it was played for Toto. A demo of it was played for Toto at one point. And the guys love to tell this story where at the time, like I said, Toto was kind of getting more and more trying to be tougher and bigger and more like what they would call, what they called stadium rock, more of a stadium rock band, and not play these sensitive ballads and stuff and get, bigger and bigger guitar and all that. And when Michael was touring, it was the Victory Tour with his brothers where he was doing the Thriller album and performing Human Nature. It was funny because for that whole summer they were touring, and we were on the road too. The only song Michael would allow the local newscasters to shoot was Human Nature.
Mm.
And so every day you turn on the news and there was Human Nature being played in a stadium,
Yeah. And so
advertising Michael's tour. So it was kind of ironic.
how did you think about, because they had John Bettis from
Yes.
Carpenters, right? What did they come to you and say, "Hey, we want your song, but we want
Quincy
someone to
did.
come rewrite"?
Quincy to Quincy, we'd been working on the tune. It'd been going good. We'd been working on the track. It was going great. And Quincy started saying, at some point I need to see the lyrics. And I was like, okay. And lyrics was always a weak point for me. And I remember I was on the road and my manager said, Quincy needs the lyrics right now. And like on the next bus ride, I fleshed out my lyrics. I mean, we always had the why, tell them that it's human nature. That's kind of how I wrote the song. That chorus was always there. But the verses were very vague about a schoolyard incident and, which is what my daughter had told me about. Anyway, I kind of fleshed those out, sent him in. Quincy was very underwhelmed with them. And we got home and he asked me, he says, do you mind if I send these out for someone, for a rewrite? I didn't know who John Bettis was at the time. And I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. I had no thing about me as a lyricist or whatever, and, I could see maybe some songwriters who consider themselves, I don't know. I had no problem whatsoever with him sending them out. And I got together with John, and what he came up with, I thought was just perfect. I didn't change a syllable.
Oh, so he pitched the lyrics to you beforehand before they actually ended up using
He ran
them?
them by me. He ran them by me what he had come up with, and I just thought it was perfect.
And now, how much legal freedom do you have? Because you wrote the song, but since he wrote the lyrics, are you able legally to perform the songs with by yourself or with Toto with the
Absolutely.
John Bettis lyrics?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you have to rally to be able to do that? Because especially when you get
Not at all. As long as I'm a writer on it, as long as you're a writer on it, I mean,
Okay.
the other person gets the credit they get, and even if it's an instrumental version, you know what I mean. The lyricist is still part of what inspired the tune, but it was completely after the fact. But no, I've always been thankful and thrilled and so happy. That was like an executive, that's what makes a Quincy Jones a Quincy Jones. You know what I mean? He was digging all of it, and it would have been great if my lyrics were great, but you know what? He made it, he made that record a song, you know what I mean? He made it a real song with real lyrics and a beginning and a middle and an end, and I couldn't have been more happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's very widely considered one of the best Michael Jackson songs. Obviously, one of the best off Thriller, but it's people love that song. It's just amazing that I feel like there's a lot of really cool stories about songs being written, just being like, oh, it came off the top of my head. But the fact that it basically accidentally got there, almost, and I mean, I loved the song before then, but after hearing stuff about that, I was just like, man, it makes it even cooler. Yeah.
It's a great story.
So let me. I want to jump pretty far ahead and ask about. So after you leave Toto, that's 87, and later on you were working on your own music, but you also get into composing scores for TV and film. So now the thing I'm really curious about is through Joseph Williams. Did you ever get a chance to talk with John Williams, and did you ever get to talk to him about writing scores and talk to him about what you planned on doing?
I wish, not really. Joseph brought David. Now, John knew the Williams family, knew the Page family for a very long time, long before Toto ever existed. David's father and Joseph's father were good friends, and fellow arrangers and musicians and keyboard players, and knew of each other very well. And like I say, we're friends. One thing Joseph did do was he would bring over his dad when he writes for film. A lot of times he would write with what they would call 10 stavers, which means he pretty much would orchestrate the whole thing. but he'd have like a music paper with 10 staves on it, and it would just say like woodwinds, and there'd be a stave for the woodwinds, and he wouldn't say exactly unless it was an English horn solo or an oboe solo or a clarinet or whatever. He just would write the chords of what the woodwinds would play, and it was all in the key of C. Nothing was transposed, and it was very easy to read if you were trying to do an electronic version. So I did two like that. There was a movie he did called Accidental Tourist that had this very dark opening title that was very cool. And then after that, Space Camp, this very more up kind of Spielbergish, you know what I mean? John Williams theme, you know? And so I did the main titles of those. I did synth versions of them, and I never got them to John. I was hoping we'd be able to play them for John, but that never happened. But I was always very, very, both of us were, David Page and I were both very interested in doing film work and stuff. And it was more our mutual friend, James Newton Howard, is the one that kind of, I was helping him for a long time after I was out of Toto, and I was working on my own stuff. And James and I started hanging out quite a bit. And I started helping him with some of his scores, just doing synth stuff. You know, I wasn't really writing for him at all, but I would add some synthesizers onto some of his cues. And one day he turned to me and says, "Do you want to do this? Do you want to try doing this?" And I was like, I had never done anything like that before. I was in Toto. We were so loose with deadlines, and we would stretch things out and get the record company to give us another month or another 2 weeks or, and it didn't really matter whether I had songs ready for Toto albums or not. There were so many writers. They didn't care whether I had songs ready or not. So I just said, I don't know if I could have music done by Thursday. You know what I mean? I've never been that guy.
And what
anyway,
year is
long
this?
story short, he got me a job. He helped me get a gig doing this TV show, and I found that not only could I get it done by Thursday, I loved it. I loved the pressure. I loved the deadline, you know.
That's the show Justified?
No, it wasn't Justified. It was way before that. It was called The Sentinel. It was a few years before Justified.
And who gets you connected to do the show Justified for? Who gets you that connection to FX?
James, right away, when I told him I'd give it a try doing a TV show, the next morning we were having breakfast with his agent, one of his agents, you know, and they happened to know of a show that had, for temp score, they had used all James's stuff. And James said he'd be willing to write the main title to the show if they would use me to write the episodes. He just completely plugged me in.
And so are you doing all this work from your studio that you're in right now?
Yeah, I had just moved, and I was just putting my studio together, you know, at the time.
Are you doing it with computer-based, like MIDI data, or are you doing actual analog instruments for the majority of the sound?
Yeah, no, this was total synth. This was just synth stuff, you know. Very soon I wound up doing a couple I did about 4 movies with a band, with an orchestra. I did a movie, Metro, an Eddie Murphy movie, where I had a real big orchestra for a few days. But, you know, I always felt, I think I was getting pretty good at some of that stuff. There was some that were more successful than others. And it just was hard for me. At the end of the day, I kind of started feeling like I was a watered down version of, you know what I mean, my heroes in that department, you know.
And were you working on your solo record at the time? Because that came out, I think, just about a year after Justified goes off the air. Is that whole period?
Yeah, no, that was kind of, Justified was the last TV show I've done. And that was a blast, by the way. I had a ball doing that with my friend Mark Bonilla, was doing the guitars. He was helping me out with that. And I love doing it. When it's a show like that, and you have great producers, and you're working with great people and people that dig what you do, it's a great gig. It's fantastic. But yeah, I'd been promising to do a solo album since I left the band. You know, I'd been talking about doing a solo album. So, you know, because I was touring so much with Toto, I was able to kind of impose a deadline on myself, you know. I knew I was going on the road at a certain point. I had piled up enough songs, and I finally did it.
And some of those tracks go back decades. How did you go about sorting through all those years of music and figuring and like kind of narrowing it down to which songs you wanted to put on the record?
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm kind of doing the same thing now. I'm always still writing new stuff, and there's always something new that'll go right to the top of the list, you know. But there's always some things, you know, some things you forget about, some things you thought at the time they were real strong, and then you listen to them later and they sound dated for whatever reason to you. But there's a whole bunch for me that don't sound dated, that still sound really, really strong, you know, for me, and I can't forget them. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now, is digging through some backup systems and stuff like that, trying to find you know, parts of these songs that I'm putting together, you know, because that's mostly what I'm doing these days, is finishing up old songs and writing new songs. And I just it's where I feel I'm being the most like myself, you know.
And so do you see a second solo record coming out in the foreseeable future?
Sure, absolutely. I don't know if any more these days if it's worth it to wait until you have 10, 11 songs all ready at once. I might get real anxious and release 2 or 3 or something like that.
Hey, well, you know what, Steve, before I let you go, I just want to, there's a couple questions from the comments, if you don't mind. I was going to go through them, just a couple. And so someone asked, Carl Taylor asks, what do you do in your free time to relax and clear your mind?
I love old movies, but you know, there's so many aspects of what I do, whether it's songwriting, whether it's piano playing, whether it's learning a classical piece, whether it's learning a new synth. There's so much stuff to do out here in this back room of mine. I can always find something that relaxes me. I just love it all so much. I love my life. I love being able to do this for a living. But yeah, I don't have a whole hell of a lot of hobbies. I love old movies. I love great old film scores. You know.
So music is really like, even when you're not doing your music is like it's your main hobby on the outside.
Sure, and I'm not. I give my ears breaks. You know, I lost the hearing in one of my ears from surgery back many years ago. But so I got to kind of pace myself. Loud rock and roll is as much as I love it. It's hard. It was been very difficult for me touring, hearing, having the sound on stage be that big. You know. Having said that, I just my Christmas present this year is some big ass speakers I just bought for myself. That I
like studio monitors.
Yeah, these APCs. They're real big and go way down low, and you know what I mean.
I've got a set of Rockets, which are not the most accurate, but man, those things can blast. But I'm so petrified of getting tinnitus that
Sure.
I just like I never really use them to their full potential. But
Me
some
too.
of these monitors can freaking blow.
Yeah, no, and these ones I'm getting sure can, and I've only got one ear, and I have to just get in this weird position, a very strange position in front of speakers to kind of get some slight semblance of stereo, of placement at all. But I had a pair of these in here for a week or so, and they just the clarity and the depth they have is something I know and I really appreciate and love.
Yeah,
Hopefully I won't blow myself out too much.
Hopefully. Here we go. One more question for the comments. Someone says, for 2023, is there any talk going about a possible 45th anniversary of Toto?
Oh, I'm sure they'll do something. You know, I'm sure Luca's going to keep it alive, and you know, they'll do something for the anniversary. You know, Toto's still going to live. As long as Luke's around, there'll be a Toto, I think, you know.
You're not planning on doing anything yourself, not going back?
Not right now. I really love being home. I really love working on these tunes. I don't want my tombstone to say the guy who wrote Human Nature, you know. I feel like I've got even though I may be getting a little long in tooth, I think I have some real cool things still in me, you know.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it so much.
You're very welcome.
I also want to say before I go, I just want to say I'm incredibly sorry about the loss of your father. He was such an incredible man. I don't think I've ever had a drum instructor who didn't bring him up and tell me about him. So I just wanted to like really just put out my condolences because it's such an incredible loss. I just want to say sorry.
He's a cool guy, and he had a great run. You know, he had a great run. He had a good life.
And well, Steve, as Howard Stern would say, you've said it all. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who watched, everyone who listened. I hope you all enjoyed it. Steve, stay safe. Have a good day, and everyone listening, stay out there and don't get the coronavirus.
Don't. Have a safe holiday, okay?
Absolutely. See you everyone later.
Wow.